And one of the things that a lot of people have trouble getting down pat to start with, once it's kind of like a light bulb. Once it turns on, usually they understand from then on. But let's say, for instance, this was a feather. Okay, the first thing I want to do when I wood burn is I want to carve my shaft, if I'm going to put a shaft in that feather. All right, and I don't carve a straight shaft down there. That one's not straight. You just don't find very many straight ones, except in the primary feathers. Those wing feathers are pretty straight. But normally, when I draw one out, I'll make a shaft like this one time, and maybe next time I might make a shaft in the next feather right next to it, that direction. But once I get the shaft made, I don't do this. Which is another thing that you see a lot of times in what I call the beginner. Looks like a Christmas tree upside down, doesn't it? It just doesn't look right. What you want to do is you want to take and you want to curve this and 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 curve, and keep coming like that. All right? And when I think you've got your wood burning fine enough is when there are no flat tops between one and the next one. If you carve it and you can see a little flat top of wood, put another line in between them. Do you see wood, flat tops? Few. You know, this isn't my best work. I typically carve or wood burn in about 80 to 100 lines per inch. For every inch long, there's about 80 to 100 lines to get it that fine. And I'm going to show you how that's done, because it's just hand-eye coordination that's easier to teach than you think. It's one of those things, there's a lot of things in life where you don't want to start because you think it's going to be a lot harder than it is. It's kind of like riding a bike. I tried to teach one of my grandsons to ride a bike a few years ago. Man, he was so sure he couldn't do it. For the first couple of days, it was just a mess. And then all of a sudden, boom, I had been running along behind holding the bike, you know. All of a sudden, I just stopped. I let him go. He rode away. An hour later, you couldn't get him off the bike. You know, it just, and this wood burning is somewhat that way. People struggle with it, and they struggle with it, and they have more self-doubts about it than anything else. And with a little bit of tenacity and determination, you can do it. You can do it. Okay, the first thing we want to do, I do 90% of all my wood burning with this chisel point. Can you all see that from where you're at? I don't know if I do it with that point normally. I've got lots of other points that I use for getting in tight places and back and under and all that kind of stuff, but this is what I do 90% of every bird with, right here. And the first thing I tell you is you got to have it sharp. So I take a piece of, I think it's 360, it's very fine, and I find a nice flat surface and I put it here, and I go back and forth and back and forth, and I keep the same angle on both sides, and I sharpen it until when I put it like that, it won't skid off my fingernail. In other words, it's sharp enough to shave. All right? Then the next thing I do is I'll take a piece of wood, test wood. On this one I used right here, you can see some, I've got some lines there that have no color at all, some that has got this real light brown. And I'll turn on my thing and I turn it. Every one of these, when you buy them in a store, usually burn too hot. I had a friend of mine, well, he actually worked for me, go in and electrically do something. I don't know if he added capacitors or resistors or what the heck he did, but he made it to where this dial won't make it as hot like it used to. I mean, used to, if I put that dial halfway up like that, it'd burn the wood, really char it. It don't do that anymore. And he did that 30 years ago, so I forgot what he told me he did. But anyway, you take it and go in a place where it doesn't show and see if it's going to cut the wood and make those little lines that you want, but not discolor it a lot. All right? Then if you've got to that point, now you're ready to wood burn. All right? I can't wood burn without my cheaters. This is my new pair. I've had them probably 30 years, but they still work. So I'm going to pull my chair around here. And by the way, if any of you have any questions while don't hesitate to ask. You know, this is not a formal presentation. I'm not going to forget my lines or anything like that. I'm going to try to do a little bit of wood burning here. If you want to come up a little closer and see what I'm doing, fine. If you don't, sit there and enjoy yourself. With this power of lens, my focal distance is about this far away. And this power of lens magnifies this 2.5 times. Okay? These are called optivisors. You can get a lot cheaper, but back when I bought these, this was the only thing that was available, and boy, are they dirty. Wow. Got a little dust on them, and I don't understand that because my basement is always dust-free. Hey, sounds like you've been there. If you want to come up and actually see, I lay the point right next to the vein, and then I drag it in a curved fashion, and I try to do the next one as close as possible. If I see one of those flats, I go back and try to wipe it out. I don't normally do this. A lot of times I'll get a TV program on, like a ball game or something, and I'll listen to the ball game. And if they have a good play, which they always replay, then I'll stop and I'll look up and I'll watch it. Then I'll go right back to this. And I kind of multitask that way. It takes some of the boredom away. When you're doing this with that in your lap, working on it like this and trying to balance it, it takes a lot of patience. But I'll tell you, I've never seen at any of the major waterfowl shows, I've never seen anybody win best of show and stuff if they weren't good at detailing and wood burning. It just doesn't happen. On most of my birds, the decorative waterfowl birds, I use Tupelo. It costs more than basswood, but I like it better. Basswood has a tendency to fuzz when you sand it, and it has a little more grain, I think, to it, and the grain interferes with your colors when you paint. If you got a grainy wood, you're going to have a dull light as you go across the grains. When I did this bird, I had to use basswood because I couldn't find Tupelo that big.
How many pieces of wood did you put
On
on
what?
How many pieces of wood did you? That's not one, just one big block.
Oh no, that was probably just in the body alone, not counting the head or feet. There was probably 6 pieces in there that I laminated together. And I can see cracks on them right now. I need to go in and retouch it up. It's been sitting in my basement for, let's see, 5 or 6 years. And that moisture on and off and on and off, it'll move the wood yet.
Do you ever make them hollow?
Hollow? No, don't need to. With Tupelo, it's light enough wood that they already float high enough. More than anything, if I have to do anything to get them to float right, I might have to lead one side to get them to straighten up a little bit. But very rarely do I ever have to hollow them or hollow anything out. And not having a flat bottom, see, most of the people that hollow out these great big hunks of cedar or even harder woods, they'll do all that and put a little thin coat of veneer across the bottom to make it flat. But I don't have that opportunity with these.
When you put your gesso on, or whatever you use for undercoat, you thin it down quite a bit so you don't fill your lines with paint?
Yes. The first thing I do after I get them wood burned is I use a sealer. It's called Kurtz Waterfowl Sealer. Okay, when you're working with your paints, the mistake I made on my very first bird, not having any instruction and not knowing what to do, is I took Liquitex acrylic paint right out of the tube with a brush and pasted it on the bird. Well, what did I do to all of the detail? You know, I just filled it. It ended up looking like a smoothie, like, you know. So then I found out you have to thin those. And I thin them to where they're almost like ink. Very thin. And on a bird like this, every feather on there has got 11 to 14 coats of paint. And every coat is a different color. And that's what gives it the ability to look. White on white is the hardest thing there is in the world to paint and make it look not like a chalk board. You know, if you paint the same color over and over, it's going to look just like a flat piece of white chalkboard. They're terrible. I would put a little yellow in, I'd put a little gray in, I'd put a little brown in, every single coat would be a little different. And I don't go over the whole feather, I go in little streaks, side by side. And those little streaks then give it that fluffy, feathery look. And there's different things that you have to understand too. Typically, different parts of the birds have different colorations, obviously. But on the side pocket feathers, you'll always find that the tops of the feathers are lighter than the bottoms of the feathers. And the further out you go, the lighter it is if you go in toward the base where the feather is attached to the skin. So you paint it that way. You paint it dark in here and a little lighter out here, and you paint it with the highlighting up here more predominant than you do down here. Now this is a poor board to show you on, because here again, this is one of these that I used to make these and take them to shows, and a lot of the shows would request that a few of us would give them to them on a 50-50 basis. They'd raffle them off at the end of the show, and they'd keep half of the money to help pay for some of the ribbons that they bought for the show. And I'd make them, you know, birds like this. Well, I didn't put a lot of time in this. From start to finish, from a block of wood to ready to go like this, about 40 hours.
What was your reasoning for leaving the tail feathers so thick on that?
It's a working bird. It's a working bird. By definition, working birds are actually birds that they put a keel on and take them out and throw them in the water and use them. And if they were real thin like that, they'd break all up. So you can't undercut them. You have to leave them like that. And obviously, for speed's sake, if you're making a donated item, you want to do something like that you do it real quick.
So you would never submit that bird for judging?
Oh no, no, unless I wanted to, you know, pay an entry fee and not take anything home for it.
So that's not a separate class by itself?
Yeah, they have at the major waterfowl shows, they'll have a class where they'll have nothing but working birds competing against each other. Okay, I don't compete in that class. I compete in the decorative floating waterfowl. That's my area of interest. Okay, but because I did so well in many shows, they liked having a bird done by me to auction off, because they usually brought pretty good money. So that's the reason why I would make a few of them every now and then. This is another one. I did this same pose on a decorative full body buffalo head, and it was featured on calendars, it was featured in magazines, and it won at the World Championships. The bufflehead class had a special contest named after a real patron who had passed on, and it won that too. But this is just a real quick working bird type thing. Any questions about the equipment? Okay.
Do you do all brush work, or do you use airbrush?
Oh, I never use air. I've got 2 airbrushes, and if somebody could show me how to use one, I'd be eternally grateful. I don't ever use airbrush. I do all my detail work with brushing, and all of my most of my blending is dry brush blending. It's what works for me. I have done oils, but I don't like oils. I get to painting, and I like to jump around on my birds a lot. And with oils, you always have to set them down and wait a couple of days, and then you pick them back up, or you know, you get it all. I don't feel comfortable with oils. Now, the man I idolize, who's the best carver in the world in my opinion, does all of his painting with oil. Jet Brenet from Louisiana. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's got, when he walks into a show, everybody just gives up. Except for occasionally, depending upon who's judging the show, Pat Godden will also give him a run for his money sometimes. Pat's as good a carver as Jet is, but the difference is in the painting. And they're both excellent painters, but Pat Godden likes, it's like a beautiful woman who sits down in a beautiful makeup table and just keeps putting it on, putting it on, putting it on, putting it on until if you get up close to them, they look like it's been put on with a jackhammer, or they look like a clown. If you get 50 feet away from them, they look gorgeous. But you get up close and it's overdone. And that's my criticism of Pat. I wish I were anywhere near as good as he is. But they do it full time. That's all either one of those two guys do. I don't know what it is right now, but Jet Bernay used to have, if you wanted to buy one of his birds, you had to order it 3.5 years ahead, because all of the birds he could carve for the next 3.5 years were already sold in advance. Okay? And when he painted his birds, he'd go out to his aviary and he'd catch the bird that he was doing and he'd tether their legs and sit them on the table and sit right next to it and paint it. You'd have the live bird there standing there. Yeah. And
What's he get for him?
pardon me?
What's he get for the bird?
A bunch. The last I knew, he was getting, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 a duck. The greatest thrill that I ever had in my carving career, well, a couple of three of them, but the one I'm going to tell you about, they start out and they have all buffalo heads in the tank. Okay, then they pick the best of the buffalo heads. All right, let's say they pick you the best of the buffalo head. They take you out and they put you on a separate table. It's called a diver duck table. The next round of competition is all first place diver ducks back into the tank. Now this time, your buffalo head is up against the canvas back, it's up against the red head, it's up against all the other diver ducks. Okay, 17 or 18 of them. And then they pick what they consider to be the best diver duck. And they take it back and they put it on another table. Now they go through the puddle ducks. Best mallard, best this, best that. Then they, best of the diver ducks. Then they put that one on. At the end of the day, there's 3 or 4 on this last table. Best diver duck, best puddle duck, best goose in confidence. Okay, sometimes it's best goose and best confidence, or seabird. Well, this one contest I went to, Pat Godden carved the puddle duck, Jet Bernay carved the diver duck, and I was entering a goose. Okay? And it so happened that the 3 of us were in the tank against each other for best of show at the end of the day. And there wasn't any question in my mind who was going to come in on the bottom of those 3. I mean, I would have absolutely argued with them if they'd have done it any differently. I knew I was going to lose. I'd conceded that a long time ago. And Jet won and Pat came in second. I took third. Okay. I went up to him, we're packing up our birds at the end of the thing, and I said, "Hey, Jet," because we know each other on a first name basis. And he said, What? I said, "Do you know where I can get a little bottle with a screw-on lid?" No, I don't. "Why do you want a bottle?" I said, "I want to get some of the water out of that tank and take it home and put it on my mantle and keep it there as water from the tank that I got to compete against the 2 of you. I'm so proud, that I want just a little bottle of water." He laughed, I was dead serious. Twice in my career, during the year, I had carved a puddle duck, a diver duck, and a goose, all in the same year. So they could all compete in the same show. I could enter one in each. You could enter as many as you want, as many as you've carved. but they can only be entered for 1 year. Then they're DQ'd. And on 2 different occasions, when it came up to first, second, or third best of show, I took first, second, and third best of show.
You used to carve the separations in these feathers.
The same little thing back here with a bunch of different carving tips. This is my box of carving tips that I use. And you'll see that I've got some very small pointed ones, and I've got some very long pointed ones. I may not have the long ones in here because they don't fit with the lid shut. But
There's ones like this now, you buy them in a package. No, not that one.
I don't buy, you can get packages of 10, 20,
Yeah.
15 for $10, $15. Those are good.
Are they?
They work. They're not like these. They're not the same quality of these.
Well, it's that,
These are $10, $12, $15 a piece,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But I've got some, and there's a technique that you use for undercutting. No, I just don't have my undercutting points with me. I'm sorry. When I start, the first thing I want to do is drag my cutter down the line that I want to cut. And when I say that, let's say, for instance, I wanted to cut right down here, and this was the tip of my carver. I don't go in it and go like this, because it's going to go like this. Okay? I turn it like this, and I drag it until I start that line. Then each time I go in, I'll angle it out just a little bit more until I can get the full depth. And it's not uncommon. I didn't bring any of my birds here today that I had here last time. I don't think. If I did it right, I didn't. Some of my deep undercut wings, I would take at shows and stuff to show people how undercut they are. I would take a card like this, and I would shove it, and a lot of times I could go further than the card, like that. Okay, that's cut all the way through there. But that's not really as hard to do as it looks like. But the one tip I'd give you is to drag it like this, and then each time just bring it out a little bit more. And don't try to take a lot of depth at one pass. Go back and make lots of passes. Take maybe 1/8 of an inch depth each time, or wherever you feel you can control it good. But if you start having trouble controlling it, you're trying to hog out too much wood at a time. There's times to hog out wood, and there's times not to. I assume everybody got a chance to look at that group of wing feathers. I've enjoyed the evening. I don't want to bore you with a lot of extra if you don't have any further questions.